Well, hey, what's up, high school? Hopefully you're watching this after the Chiefs have beaten the Browns and we are good to go for an AFC championship again next week. But we're excited that you're here, that you're joining us in whether it's a room in the church or you're watching from home or you're catching up later, whatever it might be. So we're in the second week of a series called Goals, where we're looking in the book of Nehemiah. And last week we talked about the big idea really was this: big difficulties that you incur in life. Those things can inspire what we call God-sized goals. And God-sized goals are not things that we can accomplish on our own. They really have to be a work of the Spirit that as we're working along, that God is empowering and bringing about, even sometimes in supernatural ways. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't need goals that are things that we can attain on our own, but we're talking in this perspective. We're talking about dreaming big, thinking big, but knowing that there are small things along the way that we can do, God will help us do, and that we need to plan practically to make sure those kind of things happen. So what's a goal that wouldn't be possible without a plan, right? I mean, if you have a goal, there's usually a plan, whether it's something that you've thought through or something that you kind of intuitively know. You know that it has to have some type of a plan. So something like a spiritual goal, like you can't spend time with God more regularly unless there's some type of plan. It's like it's not just gonna happen. A mental goal, like learning something new, like you're gonna have to commit yourself to studying, learning, those types of things. A physical goal, like if you want to get better at free throw shooting, you can't just wake up in the morning and say, hey, I think I'm gonna increase my percentage of free throw shooting by 10%, and it just magically happened. No, you got to spend hours upon hours and hundreds of free throws before you're going to be able to feel comfortable doing that. And then even if you're Shaquille O'Neal, it still doesn't work, okay? So a physical goal is something that you would need a plan to try to accomplish. And then a relational goal, like being a better friend or being kinder to your family. Like we might say that we want to do those, but they're not really going to happen if we don't have some type of plan. So all of those are good goals, but without a plan, they're just really, honestly, wishful thinking. Like we hope those things happen and we would love it if they did, but we haven't made a plan to make sure that those things happen. So when before Stacey and I moved, we lived in our house here for a little over a year. And there was a time in our old house that we had this just really tiny deck. I mean, it was more like a landing on the stairs than anything. And so I wanted to build a bigger deck. And so I had this goal that I was going to build a new deck, a bigger deck. And so I had to do a lot of work, a lot of looking on YouTube, a lot of searching different plans and things like that on Google. And so there are a lot of things that I learned. Like for instance, like you don't necessarily want a 9-foot by 7-foot deck because your board comes in even feet. And so unless you're forced to because of like terrain or where those kind of things, you want to keep an even feet. And then you know that some board feet, like 16-footers, are going to cost more than 12-footers, but 14-footers cost more than 16-footers on some. So like all those kind of things you learn. And so I went about doing this, and my stepdad helped. And so there were, holes we had to dig, concrete we had to pour. I mean, it was a big deal just for me to do with not a lot of other assistance. I'm not saying that my wife was no help and my daughter was no help, but they helped as much as they were able to, but that wasn't what, they didn't have a vision for the goal that I had in mind. Like, hey, we're going to build a deck and do all that. So I had what little natural talent I knew. I could do it. I'd seen other people do it. I've been around building stuff earlier in my life. So I thought, hey, I can do that. And so I just searched, like, how do you build? What's a good plan? How do you run the boards? Where's the cheapest lumber? Where's the best buy? All those kind of things. And then I engaged the help of other people, like in things that I didn't know. Like, hey, would you help me dig these deep post holes so that I don't, kill myself trying to dig them by hand by myself? And then the resources and the opportunities that I had available. So obviously we had the funds, and we were able to do that and build the deck and saved a lot of money. And here's the cool thing. This is something I took a lot of pride in, actually. when we were selling our house, I guess a little over a year ago, we actually, because we lived there for a long time, and there are things that sometimes you become blind to, we actually did a proactive home inspection where the guy came and he checked everything out, inside, outside, all that kind of stuff. And so he's looking at the deck, and he makes a comment without him knowing that I had built it. It's like, wow, whoever built this deck did a great job. It's really solid. And I kind of puffed up my chest like, yeah, that was me, that type of thing. But I don't tell you that story to brag about how good I am at achieving my goals, because I could list a whole bunch of goals that I've not achieved and I haven't done a good job at. But I tell you that because if I can have a goal and plan and achieve that, then I think that you can too. And if you're not even convinced, maybe the next part of Nehemiah's story will help convince you. So just to recap a little bit, we're in the book of Nehemiah, which chronologically happens at the end of the Old Testament, okay? Even though Malachi is the last book in the Old Testament, it doesn't happen chronologically. So this is some 400-ish years before Jesus comes, and we are, it's about 140 years before this book was written, before Nehemiah wrote this book. The Jewish people were conquered by an enemy. And they destroyed the city of Jerusalem. They burned the city down. They had, the walls were in destruction. There wasn't much left of those. But God had promised that one day the Jewish people would return to Jerusalem. So you have this remnant that is kind of living there, but they're not safe. Like, they're living there, but there's nothing to protect them. And Nehemiah was passionate about seeing Jerusalem restored. And even though there was the problem was that the city wall was still in shambles. And remember, there was kind of two aspects to this problem. There was the practical problem of Jerusalem being without walls. Like, they would be vulnerable to another attack. Like, you could get a whole bunch of people there, and then somebody says, hey, there's a bunch of people here, a bunch of resources, and there's nothing protecting them. It'd be really easy to attack them. But the second problem was a spiritual problem, because leaving the walls in shambles like they did, it dishonored God. And so rebuilding them was a way for Nehemiah to be able to honor God. So Nehemiah had a goal, but what about a plan? So if you were to go back and remind ourselves, Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 4, and then verse 11, we know that Nehemiah didn't just kind of dream this up on his own. Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 4 says, when I heard these words, which is the report that the people in exile in Jerusalem were not doing well, he said, I sat down and wept. I mourned for a number of days, fasting and praying before the God of the heavens. Okay. So he mourned for a number of days. He fasts, he prays. And in verse 11, the end part of his prayer of chapter 1 says, please, Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to that of your servants who delight to revere your name. Give your servant success today and grant him compassion in the presence of this man. Like, he's getting ready to go before the king. So there are a few things that you notice in these verses. Like, the first thing is Nehemiah didn't ask God for step-by-step instructions, okay? Just like, when Noah built the ark, God gave specific instructions on what he was to do. But Nehemiah didn't ask God for step-by-step instructions. He knew, and he felt burdened that God wanted him to lead out on this, but he didn't know what to do. So he just starts planning as he's fasting, as he's praying. Okay. So by the time that he reached the end of his prayer, Nehemiah is already starting to formulate a plan. Like, there's already something going on in his mind. And so he asked God to help him be successful in what he was about to attempt. So he's fasted, he's prayed, he's wept. This plan is starting to formulate. And so he has enough of this plan, like, hey, be with me as I go before the king, essentially. And then we see that he was a cupbearer to the king, if you read there at the end of chapter 1. And that's helpful information for us to know. And so it's thrown in there so that we know that what Nehemiah's occupation is and what it was to be a cupbearer, but also because by Nehemiah being so close to the king, he is taking advantage of the resources a la the king, right? The king and everything that he has God had already given to him. God had placed him strategically there in the king's court for this time, for this purpose. So to sum it up, you could say that Nehemiah planned while he prayed. He planned while he prayed. So it's like he didn't pray. It's like, God, give me a plan. Like as that was formulating, he started to plan while he was praying. So I want to pick it up in chapter 2, verses 1 through 9. And we read some of this last week. We're going to continue on and we're going to read all of chapter 2. And I know that part of this will seem a little redundant to you. And like, who are these guys? We're going to come to what I call the evil three stooges, if you will, of Nehemiah. And you'll see what I'm talking about here in just a little bit. But let's read here in Nehemiah chapter 2, starting in verse 1. During the month of Nisan in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was set before him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had never been sad in his presence, so the king said to me, why are you sad when you aren't sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart. So remember, the king is being, he knows Nehemiah and he is being observant of the countenance that Nehemiah has. And Nehemiah says, I was overwhelmed with fear, replied to the king, may the king live forever. In other words, like, hey, I want to honor you, but why should I not be sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? And then the king asked me, all right, what's your request? So I prayed to the God of the heavens and answered the king. If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor with you, send me to Judah and to the city where my ancestors are buried so that I may rebuild it. Verse 6, the king, with the queen seated beside him, asked me, how long will your journey take and when will you return? So I gave him a definite time and it pleased the king to send me. I also said to the king, if it pleases the king, let me have letters written to the governors of the region west of the Euphrates River, so that they will grant me safe passage until I reach Judah. And let me have a letter written to Asaph, keeper of the king's forest, so that he will give me timber to rebuild the gates of the temple's fortress, the city wall, and the home where I will live. The king granted my request, for the gracious hand of my God was on me. I went to the governors of the region west of the Euphrates and gave him the king's letters. The king had also sent officers of the infantry and cavalry with me. And here comes what I call kind of the evil three stooges. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite, and they'll have another one join them here later, official heard that someone had come to pursue the prosperity of the Israelites, they were greatly displeased. Okay, we're going to pick that up here in just a little bit. But why are we reading all these boring details? And I want you to kind of stick with me, because in these verses, what we discover is that Nehemiah hadn't just been praying and planning casually. He had been preparing in great detail, because the king asked Nehemiah why he looked sad, and he had an answer prepared. The king asked what Nehemiah wanted, and he had a request prepared. The king wanted to know how long Nehemiah's journey would take, and he had a timeline that he gave to the king. And since the king seemed pretty open to his ideas, Nehemiah also had a list of requests prepared. Like he had hey, if it pleases the king, can I have this? If it pleases the king, can I have that? So throughout this process, Nehemiah continued to talk to God in prayer, but he didn't wait for God to do all the work. He used the strategic mind that God had given him to plan and prepare while he waited for what he thought was the right opportunity. And so because Nehemiah had prepared in detail for this opportunity, and that he hoped that he would get to speak with the king, when God arranged this divine moment, if you will, between the king and Nehemiah, Nehemiah was fully prepared to take advantage of it. To sum it up, Nehemiah prepared while he planned. So he planned while he prayed, and he prepared while he planned. Now let's pick it up and we'll continue here. And I've introduced a couple of these guys, Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite in verse 10. But we're going to pick it up in verse 11 and read through the end of the chapter. It says, after I arrived in Jerusalem and had been there 3 days, I got up at night and took a few men with me. I didn't tell anyone what my God had laid on my heart to do for Jerusalem. The only animal I took was the one I was riding. I went out at night through the valley gate, through the serpent's well and the dung gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem, that had been broken down and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. I went on to the fountain gate and the king's pool, but farther down it became too narrow for my animal to go through. So I went up at night by way of the valley and inspected the wall. Then heading back, I entered through the valley gate and returned. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, for I had not yet told the Jews, priests, nobles, officials, or the rest of those who would be doing the work. So I said to them, "You see the trouble that we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned. Come, let's rebuild Jerusalem's wall so that we will no longer be a disgrace." I told them how the gracious hand of my God had been on me and what the king had said to me. And so they said, "Let's start rebuilding and let's get it done." And their hands were strengthened to do this good work. So here's the evil three stooges, all right? Verse 19, when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about this, they mocked and despised us and said, "What is this you're doing? Are you rebelling against the king?" And I gave them this reply: "The God of the heavens is the one who will grant us success. We, his servants, will start building, but you have no share, right, or historic claim in Jerusalem." So, what's going on here? Now, it might be helpful for you in your Bible to look at different maps of Jerusalem. Or if you have a study Bible, you may already have a map kind of embedded in this area. But it's good to kind of see, like, where did Nehemiah go? What was he doing when he went around Jerusalem? Because you can see where all the gates are, and you can kind of track where Nehemiah went to look at to observe and get a firsthand look at just how bad things were. But he also figured out, he needed to figure out how he was going to deal with the people that certainly were going to be his opposition. Because anytime that, that there are people that are being taken advantage of, to go and make life right for those people, the people that have been taking advantage of them will always oppose you, because you're taking away their source, their feeling of power and superiority. And so here's what's happening. So these enemies that he had encountered. And by the way, anytime you take on a God-sized goal, it usually happens that there are going to be some enemies that come along. But once again, Nehemiah was prepared, right? He wasn't naive, right? He expected people to oppose him. Like when you see that those guys went up to him, like, he didn't hesitate. He gave them an answer. He wasn't like, well, I'm sorry. It wasn't anything like that. He was wise about who he trusted. Okay, he wasn't just going to throw his plan before everybody. He was strategic about when he did it and who he trusted. And he figured out a way to bypass the people who opposed him so that he could recruit people for his God-sized vision. Like, remember, it says that Nehemiah didn't tell everybody, but once he did, and the people realized, like, the king had already given him favor, they're like, well, hey, this guy's here. Let's go with him. They bought into his vision. And they said, we're all in. So he surrounded himself with the right people. So Nehemiah ultimately planned for opposition. He planned for opposition. So we know that, to kind of recap this a little bit, like, Nehemiah planned while he prayed. And before that, we know that he prayed he planned while he prayed. I said that already. But then also he planned for this opposition, and he prepared while he planned. Okay? So think about this. Nehemiah, I think, was made for this. This is part of what God had designed him to do. So God gave Nehemiah everything he needed to make this happen. Nehemiah had access to God through prayer. He had his own talents, passions, his gifts, everything that God had given him. He had the resources, the opportunities that God had placed in front of him, and he had other people who bought into the vision. So although Nehemiah's God-sized goal probably scared and overwhelmed him sometimes, Nehemiah didn't give up, and he didn't wait around for somebody else to handle it. Instead, Nehemiah made a plan. So although Nehemiah's goal was extraordinary, he understood the tools he would need to accomplish that goal were very available to him. He like, okay, this is a big size goal, but what I need to pull this off, it is available to me. And so Nehemiah took the vision that God had given him, the skills God had given him, and the resources God had given him, And he began to get to work. So Nehemiah trusted that accomplishing this God-sized goal was exactly what he was made to do. And so just like Nehemiah, you and I are designed for God-sized goals too. That's what we're designed for. Okay? So now there's a passage, I'm going to summarize it in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 3. That essentially what Peter is saying is that you and I have been given everything that we need to accomplish what God wants us to accomplish in life. Like, we have everything that we need. We have access to all that we need to be able to accomplish what God wants us to accomplish. Now, that's not saying that God is hands off. It's just that God's going to meet us with the goal that he gives us. Okay? So think about one big goal that you've achieved. And think about that for a minute. Okay? Now, I don't know how you achieved your goal, but here's what I do know. Okay? You were able to achieve it because God designed you to do big things. And you say, well, like, I didn't ever pray to God or ask him. Like, that's okay, because part of where you are in your life is you're discovering who God is and how God's wired you. And that's okay. So if you're not sure, and if you're not sure what you think about God right now, and you're not sure that you have any God-sized goals, that's okay. Because what I want to share with you, you can still use to help you achieve the goals that you do have. So if your goals right now are all about what you want to do or achieve for yourself, the story of Nehemiah teaches that sometimes you're designed for something bigger than yourself. And that maybe Nehemiah can give you some wisdom that will help you achieve your goals wherever you are. Nehemiah is a great book on leadership. Ultimately, it's about God and what God decided to do through Nehemiah, but you can learn some things. But I want to challenge you to think bigger than just the things that you can accomplish on your own. God designs you to do big things. Not only big things, small things that cumulatively will lead to a big thing, but it's bigger than getting into college. It's bigger than getting a D1 scholarship. It's bigger than being the star of the football team. It's bigger than getting straight A's and getting the high ACT score and all those kind of things. It's bigger than all of that. And I'm not saying that those things are bad things. I'm just saying that God has something bigger than goals that just benefit you for your life. So, like we talked about last week, try asking God what else you might be designed to do, because God has big plans for you, God-sized plans. So maybe you wrote something down, but I think there's like 4 things that we see in Nehemiah's story that I think can help us turn our God-sized goals into a plan of action. Okay, so there's kind of 4 things here, and 4 things that you've got. All right, the first thing you have when it comes to thinking about your goal and putting it into action, the first thing you have is simply you. You have you. I mean, we all have days where we feel insecure about who we are and what we're capable of and who God designed for us to be. And sometimes even when we're at the darkest moments, we feel like, well, God's kind of given up on us because we've proved ourselves to be incapable of doing something good. But God designs you with care, with intention, with purpose. And so when God gives you a God-sized goal, ask, what do I bring to the table? How can I contribute? And be honest, okay? Because you have a mind that can think, that can plan, that can strategize. You have this unique blend of skills, of experience, of knowledge. You have this blend together, and you have God-given interests and passions, okay? Your friend may not have the same exact passion as you. It's because God gives you different passions and different interests. So those are things that you bring into the table under the category, if you're thinking about building a wall, under the brick labeled you. The next thing, the next brick or the next category is others. I mean, just like Nehemiah discovered, most God-sized goals cannot be achieved alone. There's a lot that we can accomplish on our own, but if we want to make lasting change, we're going to have to invite other people in, because it's, teamwork can make the dream work, right? I mean, we know that. And so you have, you can ask the question, who can I work with? You have friends and family. You have trusted adults, teachers, coaches, mentors, small group leaders, all those kind of people. You have access to knowledge through experts. I mean, you guys have everything at your fingertips. Do you realize that your generation is the first generation that does not have to ask an adult how to do something. You just go and Google it or YouTube it. I mean, that's what you do. It's like intuitively, it took me a long time to even think about that because like, oh yeah, I can figure out how to do this by watching a YouTube video, or I can do that. You guys intuitively know, like I don't need to ask anybody. I just get online and look it up. And you have access to influential people that can help make things happen, because there'll be people who have influence in certain areas that will be on board for what God wants you to do. So that's under the category of the brick labeled others. The third one is the category of the brick labeled things. And just like you need some supplies to be able to pull off any project, and Nehemiah needed transportation, he needed wood, he needed letters that would grant him access, and he needed ultimately the king's blessing. You're probably going to need some things to help you accomplish your God-sized goals. So what do I need and where can I get it? That's the question that kind of comes to mind. Maybe for you, it's like, I need some type of funding. I need some supplies. I need an audience. I need a location. I need a platform. I need an opportunity. You need all those kind of things. So that's kind of the stuff that's in your things category that you need, the building block. But I think most importantly, the category or the brick labeled God is most important. Because whether your goal is an everyday size goal or a once in a lifetime that you're going to work from now to the rest of your life to accomplish, God is with you, just like God was with Nehemiah. So like Nehemiah, God probably isn't going to give you a step-by-step plan for how this is all going to work. And there may be times where you feel like you're taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. And it's like it's painstakingly how to go forward. But that's okay because you don't need a plan. You don't need a step-by-step plan because you have everything that you need. It's like Nehemiah. Hear this. Like Nehemiah, you and I are designed for God-sized goals. We're not meant to live just an ordinary life. We're meant to live an adventurous life that is full of ups, full of downs, but more than anything, an adventure. So you've got these kind of things. You've got you've got others, you've got things, you've got God. And so now the question will be, what will you build? So take some time and talk about this with your small group, and we'll see you next week. Hope you have a great week.